Right now, at this very moment, grocery shelves across California are being quietly reorganized, not because of a drought, not because of a strike, not even because of a natural disaster, but because one of America's largest food distributors just walked away from two of the state's most critical supply chain nodes. And the man in the governor's mansion is scrambling to explain how this happened on his watch while he was busy campaigning on affordability and climate leadership. This isn't a future problem. This is happening in real time, and the dominoes are already falling. I'm Emma Clark, and this is where we do the work that mainstream outlets won't touch. We follow the money, we track the decisions, and we connect the dots that powerful people hope you'll ignore. If you value independent journalism that doesn't pull punches, hit that subscribe button right now, smash the like button so this reaches more people, and drop a comment answering this. Have you noticed any changes in grocery prices or product availability in your area in the past month? Your observations matter, and I read every single one. Here's the thesis, and it's simple. California's regulatory environment, specifically a combination of rising operational costs, new labor mandates, and compounding compliance burdens, has pushed Kroger, the nation's largest traditional supermarket chain, to shut down two massive distribution centers that together service over 400 stores across the western United States. This isn't about politics in the partisan sense. This is about math, incentives, and the cold, hard reality that when you raise the cost of doing business past a certain threshold, businesses leave. And when the businesses that leave are the ones feeding 20 million people, everyone pays the price. What you're about to hear is a timeline, a breakdown of the financial mechanics, the human cost, and the accountability gap that's widening by the day. Let's start at the beginning. Kroger operates under multiple banners. Ralph's Food for Less Foods Co. And for decades, the backbone of their California operation has been two fortress-scale distribution hubs. One in Compton, handling dry goods and ambient products, and one in Riverside, managing perishables and cold chain logistics. Combined, these facilities employed over 1,800 workers and moved more than 12 million cases of product every single week. Think about that scale for a moment. 12 million cases. That's not just feeding California. That's feeding Nevada, Arizona, and parts of New Mexico. Then came the policy shifts. In early 2023, California passed Assembly Bill 1228, which raised the minimum wage for fast food workers to $20 an hour. On the surface, that bill didn't touch grocery workers directly. But here's what nobody told you. The ripple effects were immediate. Grocery chains, which operate on razor-thin margins. We're talking 1% to 3% net profit in a good year, saw their labor costs spike as workers in distribution, stocking, and logistics demanded parity. Within 6 months, Kroger's labor cost per case processed in California rose by roughly 14%. Translation, every single box that moved through those warehouses just got more expensive to touch. But that was just the first domino. 6 days after AB 1228 took effect in April 2024, the California Air Resources Board finalized new emission standards for commercial warehouse facilities. Any distribution center over 500,000 square FT and both Kroger hubs qualified now had to retrofit their fleets with zero emission vehicles by 2027 or face escalating penalties starting at $50,000 per quarter. Kroger's internal cost analysis, which leaked to industry journals later that year, estimated the retrofit price tag at $67 million for the Compton facility alone. Add Riverside, and you're staring down a 9-figure capital expenditure with a 7-year payback window in a state where the regulatory goalposts move every 18 months. Let that sink in. You're being asked to invest $100 million in infrastructure upgrades in an environment where the rules change faster than you can recoup the cost. So what did Kroger do? They ran the numbers, and the numbers said leave. By September 2024, Kroger quietly informed the Teamsters Local 630, which represents the Compton workers, that they were exploring operational efficiencies and consolidating West Coast logistics. That's corporate speak for "we're shutting you down." The union immediately pushed back, filing an unfair labor practice complaint with the National Labor Relations Board, arguing that Kroger was using regulatory pressure as a pretext for union busting. The NLRB opened an investigation. That investigation is still pending. Meanwhile, the clock kept ticking. In November 2024, Kroger filed formal closure notices with California's Employment Development Department under the state's WAR Act, which requires 60 days notice before mass layoffs. The Compton facility was slated to cease operations by February 15th, 2025. Riverside would follow on March 30th. The governor's office released a statement calling the closures disappointing and pledged to work with labor groups to find solutions. But here's the irony. The very same week that statement went out, the governor signed Senate Bill 525, which extended health care wage mandates to include certain logistics workers in facilities tied to grocery and pharmaceutical supply chains, adding another estimated 8% to labor costs starting in mid-2025. Translation, while the governor was publicly lamenting the closures, he was simultaneously signing legislation that made it even more expensive to operate the very facilities he claimed to want to save. Think about that for a moment. Now let's talk about the human cost, because this isn't just a spreadsheet problem. Meet Maria Gonzalez, a forklift operator who worked the Compton night shift for 11 years. She's a single mother of 3. Her shift started at 1,000 p.m. and ended at 6:30 a.m. She made $23 an hour, which after taxes came out to about $42,000 a year. That's barely enough to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Compton, where median rent is now $21,100 a month. When the closure was announced, Maria had 4 months to find a new job. She applied to 6 other warehouses in the region. 3 weren't hiring. 2 offered 15% less pay. 1 offered comparable wages but was in Ontario, 43 miles east, adding 2 hours to her commute each day and $50 a week in gas. She took it because she had no choice. But her kids now wake up alone. She leaves before they're awake and gets home after school starts. Her oldest, 14, is now responsible for getting his younger siblings ready. That's not a policy outcome. That's a family fracture. Multiply Maria's story by 18,800 and you start to see the scale, but it doesn't stop there. Those workers spent money locally, groceries, gas, childcare, car repairs. When you pull 1-800 paychecks out of Compton and Riverside, you're not just killing jobs, you're hollowing out entire neighborhoods, local businesses that depended on that foot traffic, the taco trucks parked outside the gates at shift change, the tire shops, the corner stores. They're next. One closure leads to 10 more. That's the second domino. So, where does the food go now? Kroger didn't just shut down and walk away. They rued. The Compton volume got shifted to a facility in Tracy, which is 130 miles north. The Riverside volume went to a newly expanded hub in Phoenix, Arizona, which is 360 miles east. Let's do the math. Moving a truckload of groceries from Tracy to Los Angeles adds roughly $200 in fuel and labor costs per load. Kroger moves about 2,700 loads a week into Southern California. That's an extra $340,000 per week, or $17.5 million a year in transportation costs alone. Who pays for that? You do. At the register. And here's the kicker. Those rerouted trucks now cross state lines, which means they fall under federal hours of service regulations for long-haul drivers, which are stricter than intrastate rules. That means more driver turnover, longer delivery windows, and higher spoilage rates for perishables. Kroger's own internal memo leaked in December projected a 4% increase in shrink, industry term for product loss, due to the extended logistics chain. 4% doesn't sound like much until you realize Kroger moves $11 billion in product through California annually. 4% of $11 billion is $440 million in lost product. That cost gets passed down, prices go up, selection goes down, and the people who can least afford it, families like Maria's, get squeezed the hardest. Now let's talk about the third domino, because this is where it gets dangerous. Kroger isn't the only player watching this unfold. Albertsons, which operates Safeway and Vans in California, runs a similar distribution model. They've been in merger talks with Kroger for 2 years, but that deal is currently tied up in antitrust review. Regardless of whether that merger happens, Albertsons is looking at the same cost structure, the same regulatory environment, the same math. If Kroger can't make the numbers work, what makes anyone think Albertsons will? And if Albertsons starts consolidating or closing facilities, you're looking at a regional supply chain collapse, not a slowdown, a collapse. California has 40 million residents. Roughly 70% of the state's grocery volume moves through just 5 major distribution networks: Kroger, Albertsons, Costco, Walmart, and Amazon Fresh. If 2 of those 5 start contracting their physical footprint, the remaining 3 can't absorb the slack. Costco and Walmart operate on membership and supercenter models that don't serve urban cores effectively. Amazon Fresh is still subscale and relies heavily on third-party logistics. That means neighborhoods that depend on traditional grocery stores, especially low-income neighborhoods that are already food deserts, will lose access entirely. We're not talking about inconvenience. We're talking about families who have to take 2 buses to buy fresh produce. We're talking about seniors on fixed incomes who can't drive 40 miles to the next open store. We're talking about a public health crisis baked into a supply chain crisis. And here's the regulatory irony. California has some of the most aggressive food access and equity mandates in the country. The state requires large retailers to conduct health impact assessments before closing stores in underserved areas. But distribution centers, those aren't covered. You can shut down a warehouse that feeds 200 stores without a single public hearing. Let that sink in. So where's the governor in all this? In January 2025, his office announced a task force to study supply chain resilience. The task force is co-chaired by the Secretary of Transportation and the Director of the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Their mandate produce a report by June 2026 with recommendations for incentivizing logistics investment in California. Translation will have a plan to fix this 18 months after the damage is done. Meanwhile, the February closure deadline came and went. Compton is dark. 1,800 workers are scattered, and grocery prices across Southern California have risen an average of 6.2% since November, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Regional Index. The governor held a press conference in March where he blamed corporate greed and called for a windfall tax on grocery chains that exceed a certain profit margin. But here's the problem. Kroger's profit margin in California last year was 1.8%. Albertsons was 2.1%. These aren't oil companies. These are businesses operating on volume with margins so thin that a 2% cost increase can flip them from profitable to unsustainable. You can't tax your way out of a math problem you created with mandates. And let's be clear, this isn't an argument against fair wages or environmental standards. It's an argument about pace, coordination, and cost distribution. If you want zero-emission warehouses, fund the transition. If you want higher wages, offset the burden with tax credits or streamlined permitting to lower other costs. But if you stack mandate on top of mandate without regard for cumulative impact, businesses will do what businesses always do. They'll optimize. And in California, optimization increasingly means leave. Here's where it gets even messier. In April 2025, a coalition of labor unions, environmental groups, and consumer advocates filed a lawsuit against Kroger in Los Angeles Superior Court, alleging that the closures violated California's Environmental Quality Act because the company failed to assess the environmental impact of increased truck traffic from rerouted logistics. The lawsuit is ongoing, but it highlights the absurdity. California's environmental rules are now being used to challenge a decision that was triggered in part by California's environmental rules. You can't make this up. Meanwhile, on the ground, small grocers and regional chains are trying to fill the gaps, but they're facing the same cost pressures. Northgate Gonzalez Market, a family-owned chain serving Latino communities, announced in March that they're delaying 2 planned store openings in the Inland Empire because they can't secure reliable distribution partnerships now that Kroger's Riverside hub is offline. Sprouts Farmers Market, which sources heavily through third-party distributors that used Kroger's cold chain, reported in their Q1 earnings call that they're seeing delivery delays of up to 72 hours on perishables, leading to increased waste and higher prices. This is the cascading failure. First, the anchor distributors leave, then the smaller players who depended on that infrastructure scramble, then consumers in the most vulnerable communities lose access, and then inevitably the very people who championed the policies that triggered the Exodus Demand Emergency Intervention, which usually means subsidies, which means taxpayers foot the bill for a crisis that was entirely predictable. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about the national implications, because California isn't an island. It's the 5th largest economy in the world. When supply chains fracture here, the shockwaves hit everywhere. Kroger operates over 2,800 stores in 35 states. If the California model proves unsustainable, the company will lobby aggressively against similar policies in Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and Illinois, states that have historically followed California's regulatory lead. You're already seeing it. In February, Kroger's chief financial officer told investors on an earnings call that the company is reevaluating our long long-term geographic footprint in states with high regulatory volatility. That's not a threat, that's a forecast. And other industries are watching. Amazon announced in March that they're pausing construction on 2 new fulfillment centers in California, pending further clarity on labor and environmental mandates. Tesla, which already moved its headquarters to Texas, is now moving battery production out of the state. Meta just cut its California real estate footprint by 20%. The pattern is undeniable. California is bleeding operational infrastructure and the jobs that come with it. Now, let's bring it home. Here's the clean recap. California passed a series of well-intentioned but poorly coordinated labor and environmental mandates. Those mandates raised the cost of operating large-scale distribution infrastructure past the break-even point. Kroger, operating on thin margins, ran the numbers and decided that 2 massive California hubs were no longer financially viable. They closed those hubs, routed volume to out-of-state facilities, and displaced 1,800 workers in the process. The routed logistics chain is longer, more expensive, and less efficient, which means higher prices, longer delivery times, and increased spoilage. Smaller grocers and regional players who depended on that infrastructure are now struggling to fill the gap. Low-income and underserved communities are losing access to affordable fresh food. The governor's response has been a task force that won't report for over a year, a blame the corporation's press tour, and the signing of additional mandates that make the underlying problem worse. Meanwhile, the national grocery industry is taking notes, and California's regulatory model is being actively rejected in other states. This isn't a political story. It's a structural collapse in slow motion. So here's the final warning. If you think this stops with Kroger, you're not paying attention. Albertsons is next, then the regional players, then the last mile delivery services that depend on centralized distribution. And when the grocery infrastructure of the nation's most populous state fractures, the federal government will step in, not with solutions, but with subsidies, bailouts, and emergency food programs that will cost taxpayers tens of billions of dollars to patch a problem that didn't have to happen. This is a crisis of choice. It was chosen by policymakers who prioritize symbolic wins over operational realities. And the people who will pay the price are the ones who always do. Working families, small business owners, and the communities that can least afford to lose access to the basics. Here's the accountability question I want you to answer in the comments. Who should be held responsible when a policy designed to help workers ends up costing them their jobs and raising prices for everyone? Think hard about that, because the next wave of closures is already being planned in boardrooms right now, and the clock is ticking. If you found this investigation valuable, subscribe to this channel immediately. We're the only ones connecting these dots. Hit the like button to fight the algorithm. Share this video with anyone who shops for groceries, which is everyone. And drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading them all, and the best ones shape future investigations. The story isn't over. It's being written in real time in every empty warehouse, every rerouted truck, every family trying to figure out how to afford food next month. Stay sharp, stay informed, and hold the people in power accountable, because they're counting on you to look away. I'm Emma Clark. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next